What's happening, everybody? It's your boy, Jack Slack, and...
It's been 7 hours and 13 days since they took them fights away.
Can't go out, can't do fuck all, so the UFC has a captive audience and they've decided to do the strangest event of all time, pushing ahead, even in spite of the lack of Khabib Nurmagomedov. They have managed to get Justin Gaethje to sign up for it. Of course, Justin Gaethje has nothing to lose. It's Tony Ferguson who's the dummy here. I don't understand why, as one half of the biggest fight the UFC's ever put on, you are willing to risk all that for another interim title when you already had one. I mean, I had someone telling me about like pay-per-view points and shit like that, but if he wasn't getting them already, that's ridiculous. And he's already had an interim title and they took it away like that, you know, so it doesn't seem to mean all that much. And if you include a previous fight that he was booked to fight Khabib on, he's been booked to fight for interim titles 3 times now. It's kind of ridiculous because, you know, whether you're a Tony fan or a Khabib fan or a fan of both, as I'm sure most of my listeners are, you realise that they've both done almost exactly the same things. There is nothing to say that Khabib should have this real belt and Tony should have a fake one, except basically the order of how things fell together after Conor McGregor got stripped, you know? But yeah, he's a madman. He's decided to put it on the line against Justin Gaethje. Now, I'm sure that there's a lot of people in the audience who will be like, shut the fuck up, it's an amazing fight, and so on. And I recognise that that's an amazing fight. But the other thing that's really stuck in my craw about it is that, I mean, it's the same as when I was like talking about how underwhelmed I am watching MVP knock out scrubs. I am interested in the best in the world fighting the best. I'm also interested in the best in the world training specifically for the best under, you know, as close to ideal circumstances as they can manage, and then fighting each other. I'm not particularly interested in it. There are some short notice fights that come together and are awesome, but I'm always aware that like a short notice fight is not the best you will see someone fight against someone else, you know, in either direction, you know. But more than that, this isn't just a short notice fight. This is a fight where most of these guys, most of the people on the card, will not be able to train properly in the gym. They will have, you know, maybe a couple of sparring partners who are risking themselves, and of course risking the fighter, you know, because it's everyone you're coming into contact with now, the COVID stuff. But, you know, their whole team is going to be, you're going to have guys talking to their nutritionists online, talking to their strength and conditioning coaches online. You know, it's not the ideal circumstances to do anything. And, you know, that just sort of takes some of the shine off it for me. I mean, if we can all look at this and be like, yeah, it's just a fight that had to happen because we need a fight, Endeavour needs money, the UFC needs to be doing something, the bookies need stuff going on, I and other people in the MMA sphere who make content need something to talk about and write about, then yeah, that's awesome. But treating this as if it's the same as if Justin Gaethje and Tony Ferguson met, you know, 3 months ago, having had 2 months to build up to it, or 3 months to build up to it, is absurd. And the card that they put together, you know, pretty impressive when you consider that, like, 2 years ago, we had UFC 224, was it? Amanda Nunes versus Raquel Pennington as the main event, and then on the main card, Jacare versus Gastelum, which was all right, and Vitor Belfort versus Lyoto Machida at the age of 104. And I'm looking down this card, and a part of me is thinking, damn, if they get that all together, that's a banging card. But another part of me is thinking, like, what we're getting is a watered-down version of those fights. I would love to see those fights in, you know, for real, in actual normal circumstances. Let's have a quick read down of the card. Andrade versus Namajunas 2 is the one that they've put as the co-main event, but that's already fallen through, mate. To be honest, why would you try and book Rose Namajunas, knowing that she's quite skittish anyway? You know, she was the one who was not going to go through with the Joanna rematch because of, was that the first fight? Because of the bus attack, which she wasn't hurt in, but she's got some hang-ups mentally. I would have thought she'd be the last person you'd get to agree to go to a mystery location, and there's so much bollocks being spat about this mystery location already, because the UFC is terrified that if they announce it, people will write to their governor or whatever and get it banned, or get it pulled from that jurisdiction. But there's been bollocks like, the fighters will be taken to the mystery location and they won't even know where they're going. You're like, even if that's an exaggeration or just plain bollocks, this does not sound like the sort of scenario that Rose Namajunas is going to be game for. But that would have been great. Namajunas versus Andrade 1 was a bit of a clinic until Andrade picked her up and dunked her on her head. So it was kind of like the do-over for Namajunas, but going straight back into that fight, for someone who was like, I might quit after she lost the first one, maybe not the best booking decision if you want to keep Rose Namajunas around. Then you got Greg Hardy versus some bum. I'm excited to be able to hear Greg Hardy panting minutes into the first round with no one else in the arena or the grain silo or wherever we end up. One of those unused tube stations in London. But then you've got Vicente Luque versus Nico Price, that's a chef kiss. That's a lovely, lovely fight. Vicente Luque, that fight with Wonderboy looked fantastic, but Vicente Luque was catching him with counters, catching him with cross counters over the top of his jab, catching him with counter left hooks anytime that Wonderboy got a little bit too greedy, got to thinking like, I'll land 2 or 3 punches this time instead of just the one. So always a dangerous chap, and kind of underrated in that division, I think. He's a guy who had finished like every opponent he'd beaten in the UFC, and some of them had been staggering knockouts. A couple of them had been Darcy's because that's like his move on the ground. But it seemed like only the real heads, the people who follow this like shit-eating wild men, actually knew who he was. There wasn't an awful lot of interest. If you go through some of the matches that he's had in that division, like he fought Leon Edwards, and you're going, damn, that's a really good fight. If you book that now, that'd still be a really good fight. But at the time, nobody cared. But then I also think that now, if you booked it, people probably still wouldn't care, because both those guys are awesome, but incredibly overlooked in that division. And Nico Price is just an oddball. He fights really goofily, but he hits really hard and he's good on the ground, and a good finisher. And that's a really good thing to have under your belt. If you're good in every area but you're not interesting, you're Rafael Assunção, and nobody's ever going to give a shit about you. Then you got Jeremy Stephens versus Calvin Kattar. That could be great. That could be disastrous. Calvin Kattar needs to realise that he needs to move laterally and shoot 1-2s. But then he's got a sick 1-2. Doesn't like the low kicks, though. Doesn't like them at all, if you remember that fight with Canuto. Not Canuto. Fuck. Who am I? I'm thinking of Rafael Canuto, the grappler. Renato Moicano, that guy who I loved, but then he lost twice, and I was like, get the fuck out of the boys' stable. Yeah, I mean, that's a standard Jeremy Stephens fight. Will the opponent do the things that Jeremy Stephens always struggles against, or will the opponent not do those and get knocked out? Maybe not knocked out, because Jeremy Stephens is probably the most overrated finisher. Maybe underrated as a power puncher, because if he hits you clean, you're in trouble. But as a finisher, as someone who can actually stay on a hurt opponent or actually corral them, he's kind of bad. It's like Gray Maynard, used to knock down everybody, but never ever got a finish. Then you got Ngannou versus Rozenstruik, which I would consider the co-main event, so I don't know why they've got that so far down the card. And that's a banger. That was going to be the headliner of some fight night a while ago. And I think Rozenstruik's kind of in the position that Ngannou was on his first title run, where they've put the right people in front of him, Has he fought over him? And he knocked out Arlovsky with like a jab on the chin that he kept throwing when Arlovsky stepped in, and Arlovsky just kept lunging onto it. Can't remember if he knocked out over him. Can't remember if he fought over him, but if he fought over him, he knocked him out. It's that standard heavyweight, this guy's a monstrous puncher path. Yes, they might be a monstrous puncher, but you've also put 2 of the chinniest old-timers in front of them with name value. So we're kind of there with Rozenstruik. We don't really know how legit he is. Ngannou, again, he's looked sharp in his last couple, and he beat Curtis Blades very, very quickly, but beating Curtis Blades very, very quickly doesn't tell us if you've got your cardio issues fixed and your wrestling's any better and all the things that let him down against Stipe. But I'm assuming we're all just hoping for what Derek Lewis versus Ngannou should have been in this fight. Then you got Uriah Hall versus Jacare. Looking at these, I'm really not thinking this is going to go off. I just can't see them getting all these people, unless they do them at various locations across the states and televise each from a different location or something. I can't imagine this all coming together. But Uriah Hall versus Jacare. You got Uriah Hall taking on a kind of like constant contender, but just late enough where Hall should be able to pick up the win. However, he is Uriah Hall, so never discount the idea that he might perform well and still lose. There was a great clip where they were talking about this. They were talking about Uriah Hall coming up on something in one of the recent cards, and John Anik said middleweight contender Uriah Hall and Ryan Hall versus Jacare. Now that's a compelling match. He said middleweight contender Uriah Hall, and he laughed halfway through saying it. And I thought, yeah, that's basically where we are on Uriah Hall's potential. What else we got? Vera versus Borg. Okay. Why do they keep giving Borg fights? Like, he can't make weight at the best of times. You're asking him to do it when his gym's closed and he's having to like talk to his nutritionist over the phone. That just looks like it's probably going to be a catchweight fight. And Eubanks is fighting Sajara Eubanks, the GOAT. And Ryan Spann versus Sam Alvey. There we go. The fight for who is the best of people who struggled with Little Nog at the age of 43. Actually, on the subject of Little Nog, I just did a Filthy Casuals guide to Big Nog, and apparently YouTube's not sending out notifications to people anymore. So go watch that, because it's got like 6,000 views, and it's a masterpiece. So that's your fight card. I mean, we'll do more specifics of Tony versus Gaethje matchup next week, and I've got a Filthy Casuals guide to Tony in the works, so bet on Gaethje. But I think that it has a lot of potential to be a fun card, but again, already that Andrade Namajunas fight has fallen through, and they're promising like a load of other cards in the weeks to come, and it just feels really... I'm just very sceptical of the whole thing. I just can't see it all going cleanly in the coming weeks. I can't even see the first one going cleanly, but they're advertising like they found a way around it and they're going to keep doing fights. And they said this week that they're going to be testing all the coaches and cornermen and people, but you know, then you get into the whole like you've got doctors ringside, you're taking these tests when there aren't enough tests everywhere else in the world, and you get into like the moral grey area. Well, I mean, it's not a moral grey area. It's kind of deplorable. I love a fight, and I'm excited for the fights, and I desperately want some fights back on to keep me distracted from how shit it is staying inside all the time. And if you haven't noticed, like my recording setup is a little bit different at the moment because the wife's working from home too, and I'm starting to sympathise with Chris Benoit. But you can understand where people are coming from, where they're like, bringing people from all over the country / world to grapple and then sending them back. Yeah, no, not great. And using up medical resources and things. And I think it's the Netherlands has already said that they're not going to they won't be showing UFC 249, but then who watches pay-per-views on TV? You know, half the people in this sport just steal it anyway, so we'll soon see. Anyway, let's do some questions, because, you know, there's not an awful lot happened in the week aside from wild speculation over this. Oh, and the other thing is like location. You know, I've heard Private Island because I joked UFC Little St. James a little while ago, but the other one that's been thrown out there is Indian Reservation. Jeff Sherwood was saying that they're going to have them where they have the Tachi Palace events. You know, just drawing eyes to how rinky-tink this sport still is. Anyway, let's do some questions. Hi Jack, this is a note to say thank you for taking a risk 4 years ago and starting your podcast. I found it through a Filthy Casuals guide about a month ago, and as casuals come, I'm extremely filthy. I knew fuck all about the different disciplines used in MMA, and I thought BJJ was just a typo. I've never trained a martial art or combat sports, and only had a passing interest in combat sports in general, but if there's one thing I'm a sucker for, it's listening to someone who clearly loves their subject and has a deep knowledge of it. As a result of listening, I now watch a whole fight card rather than just the main event, and for me, it's transformed the fights from two dudes taking turns hitting / sitting on each other into an art. Having some historical and technical context, and possibly more importantly, understanding the memes, has been fantastic. I've been working my way through the back catalogue of podcasts, and they've really been helping me through a lonely time, living on my own for the first time after 9 years with a partner. Apologies, it got deep real quick there. Randomly emailing someone I've never met isn't something I usually do, but I enjoy the work that you do, and it has some significance for me and probably others beyond listening to one man's opinion about the fight game. I'd appreciate the ego trend if this was the other way around. I guess the question is in order for the look of the thing. Here's the scenario. You're moving house and you need some people to help you move. You have 4 groups of people to choose from. Texas Commission, Russian Anti-Doping Body, Bellator Talent Scouting Committee, UFC Women's 145-pound division. Which do you choose and why? Oh, now see, if you took the Bellator Scouting Committee, when I'm moving shit, I don't want to be keeping all the unnecessary bollocks, and I think the Bellator Scouting Committee would be there going, well, you've got all these PlayStation 1 games. I know you don't have a working PlayStation 1 now, but what if at some point you do? In fact, I imagine the Bellator Talent Scouting Committee would be scrambling all over each other to call dibs on who gets to search down the back of the couch cushions. So they're out of the question for a start. Russian Anti-Doping Body, I reckon, if you had a big porn stash, as in stash of porn rather than porn moustache, which I am growing at the moment to annoy my wife. But if you had a big porn stash and you wanted to keep it hidden from the significant other, the Russian Anti-Doping Body would be the one, or collection of love letters from an affair. Texas Commission would just be dropping your shit everywhere. So I'm going to go women's 145 division, and then I really only have to shell out for one pizza. They could split it between the 4 of them. Yeah, I reckon that's who I take. He says, therapeutic use exemptions bless, from Sam. Cheers, Sam. I included that because that's one of the nicest emails I've received, and it made me realise that, I've been kind of lazy in the last week or two because, there hasn't been a lot going on, and I've just sort of sat back and watched fights that I enjoy and not really put out the podcast as regularly as I like to. I like to do 2 a week. It's a lot easier when there's stuff going on. It's a lot easier when there's a fight every week because then we can do a preview and a recap episode each week. But I will attempt to be better getting these out on the regular, even if they're not as long as usual. Cheers, Sam. Oi, oi, Jackie boy. It's Johnny Boy, who is a 5'2" and 130-pound blue belt in jits. Don't call it jits, mate. My current style is focused on keeping a very technical open or half guard, and I mainly attack leg attacks or back attacks. Any ideas on what to do to improve my style since my competition record has been shoddy, with guys out hustling me as opposed to being technically better? My main influences at the moment are Mikey Musumeci and the Meow Brothers. Do you have a rubber spine? That would be my first question, because it always helps if you get one. Work on your flexibility lots if you're a smaller guy, because it's such a bonus to be able to invert and use that to keep your guard where if you were a bigger guy and you couldn't invert, maybe the guy would just run around your guard or cut through it. Inversions can save you an awful lot as a smaller guy. For me, also, when I'm rolling with bigger guys, I think leg dexterity really helps. For things like the reverse De La Hiva, if you're going against evenly sized guys with you, you can just chill with the what is it? Firas Zahabi calls it the reverse De La Hiva lockdown. But sorry, I'll explain for the layman in the audience. Reverse De La Hiva is when the opponent's standing with 1 foot forward in your guard and you're hooking with the inside leg, the one that's to the inside of their crotch, hooking, and you're holding the ankle normally too. Certainly no gi, you're normally holding the ankle. But that's the one you roll under and get underneath people on. But as a bigger guy or against people of the same size, you can have your other leg, you can just bring it in underneath the reverse De La Hiva foot and use it to lift the guy and move him around, or just keep it there. Whereas if you're going against bigger guys, I really like to bring that top leg, the outside leg, the one that's not hooking, I really like to keep pummeling that back to the inside, on the hip, on the shoulder, into the armpit when they start opening up their arm to knock your leg off. I think that having a foot on the opponent really helps, and that is really helped by hip flexibility and dexterity and the ability to invert. Great match for that is Rafa Mendes versus Rodolfo, which happened at some random Abu Dhabi no-gi event, as in Abu Dhabi, not ADCC. And Rafa Mendes used the reverse De La Hiva basically just to keep Rodolfo from passing his guard, and Rodolfo is one of the best guard passers in the world at heavyweight, and Rafa Mendes is not nearly even a heavyweight. So reverse De La Hiva is always a good one, and it links nicely with half guard, which is, when you're talking about no-gi, as we said last week or the week before, it's all leg attacks and singles from half guard. And the single from half guard and the tight waist from half guard, the Lucas Lech style guard, have been enormously successful for him, and he's done it against much bigger men too. They're really nice technical positions where you can get into the weeds and make it complicated for your opponent. The other thing I'd say is really focus on getting on the attack. Because you could play an open guard where you're laying on your back, or you could be like trying to do the Marcelo Garcia sit up and arm drag stuff. But it really helps if you're going after the dude. I think there's a tendency, I have this tendency when I roll with really big guys, I get in the habit of going, well, aren't I holding my guard well? Rather than going, oh no, I should be attacking him the whole time. He should not want to be in my guard. Cheers, Johnson. Hey Jack, I was wondering if you could find some examples of fighters that jab well as a southpaw or that jab well against southpaws. I find some trouble with this in my own training and I wanted to see it done correctly. Also, if you could go into things that fighters look for to successfully jab in an open stance matchup, that would be very much appreciated. The biggest example I can think of this going bad is GSP versus Hendricks, where Hendricks was able to take away the jab of GSP. I would like this not to happen to me, and so any advice is appreciated, Bobby. Well, Bobby, well, I was going to say you're not GSP, but you could well be Robert Whittaker, so could well be. God, that would have been a great fight. I wish that had happened instead of GSP just doing the one cash grab middleweight fight and then leaving. Examples of good jabbers, southpaw jabbers. I think a great one is Pernell Whitaker. He was really useful with his jab, and he was a southpaw, and one of the more successful southpaw world champions in that era. I mean, it helps to have incredible reflexes and be basically unhittable, but he did really good work with his southpaw jab. Again, southpaws. Roy Jones used to like to throw the right hand lead against orthodox fighters and the jab against southpaw fighters because, you're supposed to focus the other way around. And his jab was really good against the southpaws he fought, but then he fought an awful lot of bum southpaws and bums generally. I think, you gotta consider what you want your jab to do, because if you want to snipe people with your jab, it's quite difficult to do as a southpaw anyway, because you're going to have to move that lead hand a lot of the time, and you can shoot up the inside of it. I'm trying to think of good examples. There's been loads, but I can't think of any specifically right now. But you'll see it when guys are really good at flicking that jab up the middle, and the opponent's hand will be on the side of their jab, parrying it, but their jab will still connect. It's just a speed thing. You get it up the middle like that, and if you can start sneaking them up the middle like that, you can start showing the shoulder and then coming with a very slightly arced jab around the side, which you could call it a hook, but it's not a hook because it's going straight towards the opponent. As a hybrid punch. It's just the line your jab takes basically, but you make those small adjustments, and that's how you deal with that clashing lead hands and clashing lead shoulders position. Of course, taking a step, if you're a southpaw, so taking a step round to your your left rather, taking a slight step that way and throwing the jab in that way works well, because that's basically the same as if you think safety lead from orthodox, or someone like Dominic Cruz, where he steps down on that slight angle to fire in his jab from his left. It's like that, but done from the other stance, so you're going the other way. And of course, you're bringing your lead shoulder inside of theirs. But the southpaw jab, there's southpaw jabs and there's southpaw jabs. There's guys who score the southpaw jab lots. Trying to think of some good ones. I feel like Andre Ward did it a lot. Was it Chad Dawson or someone like that he fought? And he did a load of work stepping to the inside of their lead foot and jabbing. That was good. If it happened, which I can't remember. But then there's people like Pacquiao who had the most frequent but inaccurate jab as a southpaw in history, possibly. He threw his jab all the time, but it was to build off. He'd throw the standard Pacquiao combo was the jab, left straight, and then up jab, straight uppercut, whatever you want to call it. Up jab is probably a better name. And he'd do that circling to his left, and then he'd go jab, left straight to the body, and then right hook around the side, coming up to his right. And, he just constantly had his lead hand out there so that the opponent was dealing with it. And then he'd throw 4 or 5 punches. And he threw lots of jabs on their own just to make the opponent parry or slip or do whatever. He was very rarely concerned with actually skewering the guy with the jab. It was just he was running through all their reactions, making sure they were doing things, and then he was moving into his combinations. I'm going to have a good think about that now. Shit. Cheers, Bobby. All right. Got a long one now. All right, Jack, I'm a Patreon boy based in Taiwan. I hope you and your listeners are healthy. Oh, smug Taiwan. They don't have any cases, do they? The situation here isn't that bad compared to most places. Oh, there we go. Just lots of people queuing for face masks. Most people are still going to work as normal. Some gyms, brackets non-MMA gyms, are still open. Although we get our temperature taken and sprayed with disinfectant at the entrance. Questions. Okay, we'll do this one at a time. What are your thoughts on kids watching MMA fights? Should MMA fights have age ratings as films and games do? I've always thought it odd that people, including fighters, bring their kids with them to watch MMA fights. Presumably they wouldn't condone their kids watching films rated 18 plus due to the violence. Why the double standard? I recently watched a short video on Mark Coleman. It reminded me of the pitfalls of bringing your kids to watch you fight. Okay, we'll answer that now. That Coleman video, it was kind of touching, the UFC one that was about, like, where are they now? Or Pioneers or something like that. And it's good to see Mark Coleman happy. But, we're talking about the time that he brought his daughters into the ring after Fedor rearranged his face and they were just bawling because naturally they'd just seen their dad get beat up, which is horrible. So yeah, there's kind of that, and Max Holloway's son, watching him lose to Poirier and take some harsh blows in that too. And they always show them at the boxing too. It's like, some women in really nice clothes with their 3 bratty kids who are also in really nice clothes. And they'll be screaming or they'll show them slow-mo screaming between the rounds for no reason, which I think is like the worst kind of voyeurism. Like, I'm happy watching people get brained, but I'm really uncomfortable watching other people cry about people getting brained. Ratings for MMA fights, I mean, that then you're getting into spoilers because, you're spoiling what's going to happen, unless you're like, Tony Ferguson is fighting in a minute, so this is naturally rated M for mature. But I had this not a little while ago, this was like 10 years ago probably. They were replaying on, like, I'll set up the story. I was looking after a friend's kids, and they were replaying the Randy Couture Tim Sylvia fight. And that's not a particularly bad fight violence-wise. And I was like, oh, cool, I'll watch that while the kids are off doing whatever they're doing. And then one of them comes through, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is a great fight, you'll love this. And then I was like, oh wait, no, why am I showing this fight to a child? And I thought, probably, I'll just turn that off because I don't want to have to explain that to their parents why they now like fighting. But I wouldn't think anything about it. I was just like, yeah, I just watched that. That's quite tame. That's a very tame fight, to be honest. It is a strange one. Like, people are fine with their kids watching boxing, which is objectively way more violent than someone doing fake violence in a movie. And you could be like, the kid doesn't know, but I think we were all, from a fairly young age, realised that people weren't actually dying in movies, whereas people are actually slowly dying in the boxing ring, and sometimes dying in the boxing ring. But again, it brings us back to just our weird way of viewing fights as people anyway. We know that just because there are cuts and blood doesn't mean that there's an awful lot of brain trauma going on. The whole reason we brought in gloves was to take away the cuts, put in a nice layer of padding over people's fists so that the bone to skin to bone sandwich doesn't cause cuts as often. But really it just let people hit harder and cause more brain trauma without the fight being stopped due to cuts. But it's the cuts that people freak out about. Even now, like, if you did a bare knuckle event, people would freak out about the cuts. Or just freak out about how shit tier some of the fighters on these bare knuckle cards are. Shannon Briggs is going to bare knuckle, by the way. Get excited. But yeah, that's just the way we think. Like, blood is bad, and blood is objectively worse than being hit in the head, just without blood, in our collective societal opinion. Even though all the science that's been done on it says no, that's not the case. Question 2. Do you think the problems that fighters will face during the quarantine period and beyond, i.e. supporting themselves during the viral outbreak, dealing with the medical costs, etc., will galvanise them to finally create a fighters union? Probably not, because these people are, I don't want to disparage anyone, but you can see that the attitudes in MMA are so bad to this. Once you take away the daft left versus right thing of the idea of the word union, you realise that, yes, we do want the fighters to be able to negotiate together to get better pay and better conditions. And, as much as we all laugh at Bellator for having no drug testing and things like that, I also want fighters as a group to decide what is the correct amount of testing to be done and so on, because right now they're independent contractors, but people can just knock on their door at 1 a.m. and be like, yeah, we want your pee and we're going to watch. Actually, that's one of the things that will happen during the quarantine. You're going to see some guys coming back jacked and juicy because the testing's had to stop. But yeah, the attitudes in this sport are so bad to it. And I noticed that Sam Alvey was the first guy to jump on this card and be like, I'm a company guy. Because these morons, frankly, think that by being a company guy, they will get themselves into a good situation financially and, get themselves a future. And that has worked for one person total, Conor McGregor, and he did it by being a company man and jumping in for short notice fights and fighting whoever until he was the draw. And then the moment that happened, he was like, no, fuck off, I'm not fighting without 6 months notice, or however long notice I want, and I'll fight once a year or once every 4 years, and you'll pay me a lot of money for it. Because that's the nature of the partnership between the UFC and the fighters. It's not really a partnership if the UFC can get away with whatever they want. If you have the union in place and you have some level of negotiation between the UFC and the union, then the relationship will go much better and you will actually be in a partnership. And the thing is, like I said, idiots like Sam Alvey will point to that and go, oh, union, everyone will get paid the same, blah, blah, blah. Kobe fucking Bryant, when he was asked by, I think it was Leslie Smith, legend, at the UFC athlete retreat, what he thought of the NBA's Players Association, he said it was the most important thing that the NBA players had done, and that it was vital. And he's not being paid the same as some, first season guy for the shithole Dredgelords or whoever the worst team in the NBA right now are. Kobe Bryant made millions and millions and millions more than any other player in the NBA, except the superstars like LeBron James. He wasn't hamstrung by the fact that the other players were paid more by being in a union or a players association. The reason they call it players association is because union has these daft Red Scare connotations to it. But I was watching DC and Josh Thompson argue this week. Josh Thompson was like, I think you'll find all the fighters in Bellator were just paid not to fight. And DC was like, Josh, these guys want to fight. They want to fight in the UFC and get paid for it. They don't want free money. And you're like, you fucking morons. Arguing over whose dipshit millionaire promoter is being slightly nicer to the people that he's taking advantage of. No, get a fucking union. And Josh Thompson and Daniel Cormier could be at the forefront of that effort, but they're not, because they've got theirs. Question 3. Can MMA get any more rinky-tink given that Dana plans to buy and Enter the Dragon / Mortal Kombat Fight Island? Will the main event take place in the octagon made of mirrors? Some book recommendations. I know you're a fan of exposing bullshit, of history, and of Japan, so you might like Zen at War by Brian Victoria. Cheers from Matt. Always like a good history recommendation. Haven't read that yet. Read it out on the podcast, so now someone will jump in and be like, Brian Victoria is a famous eugenicist or something like that. But yeah, a while ago I was talking to Battles of London. I was going to do a piece on just the nonsense of Bushido and how it's been, adopted and kind of invented, and how the Japanese government used it in World War II to get young, impressionable men to fly planes with half a tank of fuel into things. And I was going to be doing something on that for Battles of London. I started reading a load of stuff on Japanese medical experience on prisoners of war and shit, and I got really depressed. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today, / this week, / whatever. If you haven't checked out the Filthy Casuals Guide to Big Nog, make sure to, because otherwise, if it only gets 10,000 views, I'm not going to bother doing a Tony Ferguson one, because YouTube's not showing my shit to people. I don't want to be one. I promised I wouldn't be one of those people who bitches about the algorithm, and I didn't set up an AdSense account or anything. I don't make any money off YouTube because I didn't want to be one of those people who relies on the algorithm for their living. But I'm going to bitch about the algorithm. The algorithm fucked me, folks. So go watch the Big Nog thing, share it, force your relatives who've never watched a fight before to watch it, then force them to watch Nogueira versus Bob Sapp in full because it's fucking awesome. And what have we got lined up for the coming weeks? I'm going to be doing something on Andy Risty. I've been going through his career lately, getting some stuff ready. Might be an article, might be a video, don't know. We'll see. And I'm obviously working on Tony Ferguson stuff for next week if it happens. If you want to support the podcast and get access to interesting shit that I write for people in these weird times, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgoneby@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. Oh, and I forgot to plug the big Gary Tonin piece that I wrote for the Patreon boys last week. Tonin versus Palhares. Absolute masterclass. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Knife fights on the paedophile island, bless.